Welcome to our Executive Summit series on space, aerospace, and aviation. Now, this afternoon, we're going to look more deeply at two topics. The first one is aviation in Canada and how can it grow and become stronger? And the second will be Canada's future in space. Now, these two topics go very well together because, as we've discussed earlier, Canada has a very long and proud history in both, and numerous companies are leading the way. Now, on aviation, Canada was in fact one of the very first to see a powered heavier than air machine take flight. The first Canadian flight, for those of you who are history buffs, was back in 1909 when the famous Silver Dart took to the air off the ice on a cold February morning at Bedeque, Nova Scotia. Now, since then, Canadians have contributed in so many ways to aviation, from the wars to airframe development, to engine design and manufacturing, and of course, to commercial transport for the general public. This last element is of particular importance for a country like Canada, where we have countless small populations separated by vast distances and challenging terrain. In some cases, air isn't just the best way to make a trip, it can be the only way. Now, this is where Air Canada enters the story. First formed in 1937 as TransCanada Airlines, the company started by connecting Vancouver and Seattle with a 50-minute flight that carried 2 passengers and the mail. By 1964, TransCanada had become Air Canada. And by 2019, pre-COVID, Air Canada was, together with its Air Canada Express regional partners, carrying over 51 million passengers to nearly 220 destinations on 6 continents. But now with COVID in our midst, perhaps no sector has been more harmed than travel and tourism. In fact, in 2020, passenger numbers declined by over 90%. Now, that staggering fact made the job of Air Canada's new boss, who just took the reins in February, among the most challenging in Canada. But Air Canada wisely chose someone who's regarded as one of the most experienced and knowledgeable in the industry to take on this daunting task. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to introduce Michael Rousseau, who's the President and CEO of Air Canada. Mike, over to you.
Well, thank you, and hello, Perrin. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this summit, and good afternoon to everyone out there. The aerospace and space sector are extremely important to the economy, and so I'm pleased to be here to talk about Air Canada's contribution. The themes you're exploring today are highly relevant, especially as they touch key public policy areas such as competitiveness and infrastructure. First, however, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Chamber and you personally, Perrin, for the very effective advocacy work you're doing on behalf of the industry, and really for all Canadians. For example, the Chamber's leadership on the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable has been invaluable. And the Chamber continues to highlight the need for a safe reopening of the economy, especially with respect to US and international borders, which are vital to trade, mobility, and connectivity. So thank you. Along with being a partner, Air Canada is, of course, a major customer of the aerospace industry. Over the past decade, we have spent in excess of $10 billion refurbishing our fleet. This included the acquisition of 37 Boeing 787-8 and 787-9 aircraft. And the Dreamliner, as it's called, is now our wide-body workhorse. At present, we're also midway through a major aircraft order for our narrow-body fleet. We currently have 24 of a planned 40 Boeing 737 MAX aircraft, with 3 more arriving in the second half of this year. And we have 24 of a planned 33 Airbus 220 aircraft, with 3 of those arriving in the second half as well. The part I'm less happy about, although it is music to many of your ears, is the fact we also have to spend a fair amount of money maintaining these aircraft. To give you an idea, even in these times of reduced COVID flying, we spent $277 million on maintenance in the first half of 2021. In more normal times, to take 2019 as an example, we spent more than $1 billion a year on maintenance. A good portion of that money is spent here in Canada. For example, maintenance of our Airbus 220 fleet will be performed in Quebec, and all other narrow-body aircraft are also maintained in Canada, including the Boeing 737 and Airbus 320 family. In total, more than 100 aircraft. In addition to this, there are many other key suppliers and partners. For example, last week we announced with CAE an exclusive 5-year aircraft maintenance training partnership agreement. CAE will now be our Transport Canada approved training organization for aircraft maintenance and engineering. The agreement includes the development, management, and delivery of all of Air Canada's maintenance and engineered training, including all regulatory approved training. A lot of our current maintenance costs are associated with restarting the fleet after COVID. At our lowest point, only 63 aircraft were in active operation, leaving about 3/4, 75% of our fleet parked in numerous locations around North America. Within a little over a year, we've ramped up to our current level of 146 aircraft flying, a little more than 60% of our fleet. And that number is tracking to grow to 195 aircraft by the holiday season, December of this year, increasing to about 82% of our original fleet size. A very, very fluid situation, coupled within a relatively short time frame, have created significant challenges, mostly from a capacity perspective. The aircraft requires storage, return to service, and maintenance check activity, and this has placed a burden on the MRO capacity. From a supply chain perspective, the rapid uplift has placed increased demand on materials and logistics. Suppliers are doing their best to provide quality service through these challenges of their own. So let me take this opportunity to thank all our supplier partners for their hard work and cooperation. We need you to restart this economy and travel. It is also very important to mention that apart from our direct aerospace spending, there's also a lot of other ways Air Canada contributes to the Canadian economy. This ranges from the wages we pay our employees to the fare the customer pays taking an Uber to the airport. There's catering, hotels we use for our employees, our expenditures on marketing, and so forth. Beyond that, there's all the economic activity that airlines make possible, including facilitating in-person business meetings. Remember those? And moving valuable cargo. Prior to the pandemic, we estimated that Air Canada contributed approximately $21 billion to Canada's GDP and supported the employment of almost 190,000 people. We have a very large economic footprint. And I think that is something people need to understand. And sometimes organizations like the Chamber can help people understand that airlines are about a lot more than going on holiday. They are key economic drivers, and they facilitate a significant spin-off economic activity. This is why, as our economy recovers from COVID, it is important that we have a strong airport transport industry, which also requires it to be supported by a very strong aerospace industry. Perrin, I'll stop there so we can explore some of the issues a little bit further together.
Well, Mike, thank you very much. You've really set the scene for us very, very well. And just before we start our conversation, let me remind our audience members that if you have a question that you'd like to contribute, please use the Slido link that you received with your registration information. And our team behind the scenes will be filtering through and working to bring as many questions as possible up here to the virtual stage. Well, Mike, you really set the stage for this discussion very well. We're just now starting to see some travel starting to resume, though of course it's nowhere back to normal as yet. How do you, in your projections, how do you expect the numbers to bounce back over the coming year? We even hear some people talking about so-called revenge travel, that they've been missing being able to go on vacation or being able to do business. Is there a pent-up demand for people as soon as it's safe and as soon as they're comfortable traveling again?
There's no doubt we're seeing some evidence of that, and I'll speak about that in a second. Just to give everyone this kind of the same foundation, this quarter, or summer quarter, which is seasonally the best quarter we have for travel, our capacity is about 85% higher than last year, which is good. but it's 65% below what we flew in Q3 of 2019, kind of the last normal year. So we still have a way to go, but it has improved. Canada continues to lag, although there's been a fairly significant ramp up over the last little while. IATA's latest numbers indicate that ASMs, or whatever capacity measure you want to use, was only down 53% compared to July of 2019. So we're not tracking to that level at this point in time. As expected, as we expected, we see visiting friends and family, leisure, and then maybe some business traffic coming back, starting with domestic and then international as restrictions lift. As I was mentioning earlier, the summer was probably a little bit stronger than we expected, especially August, to address Perrin's point about pent-up demand. And the second point of evidence we're seeing on pent-up demand is that we see the sun vacation bookings for the winter look very strong. And at some points, some days, we actually had bookings for that period of time that exceeded the bookings in 2019 for the same time period. So there certainly is evidence of pent-up demand. But on top of that, and I think what's critically important is from this, we conclude people, customers, passengers, feel safe about traveling. But the issue now is the inconvenience and the confusion of often very unnecessary restrictions and travel requirements that keep them from doing so. And those are the things we continue to work on with the government of Canada.
Mike, let's deal directly with this question of safety, because you've made an extraordinary effort, as have other airlines, in terms of trying to ensure that this is a safe experience for people. Tell us about some of your efforts and update us on how successful they've been. I'm talking to you today from an office building. People would assume that was safer than being on an aircraft. But that's not necessarily the case, is it?
No, I think that's right. And I think there's been a lot of confusion about the whole safety environment on a plane. Although, as we know, many studies have proven that given the filtering systems and everything else that exists on a plane, it's very difficult for a virus to move from one person to the other. But aside from that scientific basis of information, Air Canada, like many airlines, have improved the entire safety environment. We have something called Air Canada Clean Care Plus, which is a whole process where we provide the customer a much higher degree of safety than we've done before. Different cleaning procedures, kits that go on the plane. On top of that, we participated in the master study, which was the largest of the kind in the world. And we have testing regimes. And as you've seen recently, we've put in a mandatory vaccination program for Air Canada as well. So we believe on many fronts we're a leader in this area, and it's always been our biggest value, our strongest value, safety first and always. And so for us to step up from on an already very, very high standard was important from our perspective. Now, we believe the success of our efforts, our collective efforts in the airline industry, has showing in the government stats that only 2% of COVID cases are due to travel. Now, the government needs to go further and reward people who do all the right things and free them to travel if they demonstrate they're vaccinated. And we continue to go back to the government's own expert panel report that was published several months ago with some excellent recommendations. Very important recommendations that have to be acted upon. And with vaccination rates as high as they are, there's no reason not to follow the science and the expert advice. And we believe certainly giving the vaccinated more freedom would also be an inducement for the vaccine hesitant to get vaccinated as well.
Can I just pick up on that, on the point that you were making there? For over a year, governments at all levels have been sending out messaging that's been pretty consistent to Canadians, which has been stay home or you'll die. That's changed somewhat now, where they're saying, well, some travel may be acceptable. At what point should governments be moving to say, we believe that the measures that have been taken to protect people who are traveling are prudent, they're responsible, and that it's safe to travel, and we encourage Canadians to resume more of their ordinary lives? Are you satisfied with the messaging you're getting from governments today, or should it be moving to something that is more positive?
Well, certainly we would like to see more positive messaging from the government of Canada, but it has moved from negative to neutral, and which is an improvement over the last little while, given the high vaccination rates, given the amount of initiatives that we put in place collectively as an industry. And our hope, and certainly we continue to talk to the government about modifying the language in a more positive tone as we go forward. And we're going to remain hopeful that that's going to occur, relatively soon.
Now, can we talk for a minute about the comparison, for example, with other jurisdictions? In some other jurisdictions, the slower pandemic period was used to speed up infrastructure improvements. Now, LAX, for example, accelerated capital expenses and improvements to make the most of the situation. In Canada, our government didn't take the same approach. Are you concerned that that leaves Canadian carriers at an infrastructure disadvantage versus carriers in other countries?
A very interesting area. As I think, as many know, the infrastructure here in Canada is funded differently. And although our airports are in relatively better physical space, and to a large degree, that's a competitive advantage for the airlines that fly in and out of Canada. But on the flip side, as a result of the user pay model that we have in Canada, currently our Canadian airports are financially challenged. COVID, for the most part, showed the shortcomings of our user pay model. Once the users disappear, the infrastructure comes under pressure. And as a result, we've seen airport debt deferrals, we've seen higher fees, we've seen higher airport improvement fees, and we've seen direct government financial support. Even before COVID, this funding model was costing Canadians travelers more, putting the Canadian industry at a bit of a financial disadvantage. And it also affected the overall economy by hurting our industry. Which is, again, like I said about before, is a key economic driver and frankly, a national competitive advantage. There's no doubt this entire user pay model needs to be revisited for the sake of our competitiveness in the recovery. And in fact, that was the conclusion of the Emerson report that was done before the pandemic occurred. For example, NAV Canada fees, great organization, but they had to increase by 30%, given this user pay model, due to the reduction in traffic. Airport improvement fees have been increased in many airports, exceeding $40 in some cases, compared to $4.50 in the US. In addition to user pay fees, we've also seen other costs that impact our competitiveness and will hinder the recovery. Airport rent and even city taxes are good examples. No other countries that we compete against charge these type of fees in this type of magnitude. And there's no doubt the recovery of this industry and our ability to attract more people to visit Canada depends on our competitiveness of the travel infrastructure. Governments and the industry have to work together on a more standardized approach to travel, both on our domestic and international markets. Travel requirements, vaccine certification, and testing requirements, as these are all incremental hidden taxes. And Perrin, we could spend quite a bit of time just on this area. The important thing here, in summary, is the airport infrastructure supports the economy generally and benefits everybody, not just the people flying. Canada's user pay model does not account for this, and from our perspective, unfairly taxes travelers.
Mike, you really put your finger on a key point that I want to stress to our audience today, and that's that we tend to look at the airline sector as an entity in itself. How much money is spent on that? How many people do they employ directly, and so on? But just like when we were talking with Dan Goldberg earlier about the satellite sector, you're an enabler. You enable growth in the economy in a wide range of sectors. both in terms of direct spending that you make, but also in terms of the use of your service. And you operate in a highly competitive, highly international context where other countries see their airline sector as a key part of their economic strategy. Governments responded in different ways during the pandemic in terms of how they supported their airline sectors. In terms of your own business and your own workforce, how did Canada's response to COVID and business supports stack up against your international competitors? And are there going to be long-term implications of how and when our sector receives support versus airlines in other countries that you're competing with?
Yeah, and again, another very interesting question. And obviously, we've been monitoring what other countries have done for their airline industry. Luckily, Air Canada, entering the pandemic, was in a very, very strong financial position with roughly $7 billion liquidity and one of the strongest balance sheets relative to our size of any carrier. We understand the risk of this business, and therefore we build in risk mitigation, which is typically a strong balance sheet. Since the pandemic, we've raised a fair amount of liquidity ourselves. We concluded a series of financing transactions in 2020, totaling roughly $6.8 billion. And then in August of 2021, we completed an additional refinancing transaction exceeding $7.1 billion in value. And certainly, I think the success of that financing is a result of our financial strength and our brand and our position within the Canadian marketplace. Like most airlines, we're very quick to manage costs, reducing our network, grounding 79 aircraft. And by far, our most painful decision was that we had to lay off half our staff, 20,000 incredible employees. That was our heart-wrenching decision for us, but unfortunately necessary. And I'm also pleased to say that we're in the process of rehiring. As I mentioned before, the business is starting to come back, slower than what we'd like, but we are rehiring the majority of those 20,000 people. The other thing we did well, and certainly a crisis does make you think outside the box. We pivoted to cargo. As everyone knows on this call, the whole supply chain system is broken, and it was broken fairly quickly. And on top of that, not many passenger planes were in the air anymore, and they obviously carried a lot of cargo. So that created a lot of demand for cargo capacity. We were among the first carriers to jump on this. We removed passenger seats on regular planes to carry more cargo, and we took a further step, converting some of our older grounded aircraft, our 767s, into full-time dedicated freighters. And these will be entering the fleet soon. We used COVID as a springboard to grow what was a small but healthy cargo division into a much more significant part of our business. And we see lots of potential, especially with our e-commerce business that we're setting up and also expanding in that area as well. So overall, I think our response was strong. Where Air Canada lagged, where Canada lagged was in the areas of testing, travel restrictions, and financial support. While the CEWS program, the General Wage Subsidy Program, for all businesses was helpful, it fell well short of what other countries, especially the US, were doing. With respect to restrictions, Canada locked down travel harder than almost every country in the world. They did this even though their own stats showed that less 2% of COVID cases were related to travel. Most was, of course, community spread. Now, we're not denying that air travel was a vector of the disease. In fact, we pulled out of China in March of 2020 when the pandemic began, ahead of our own government travel restrictions. But our point was and is, especially as the understanding of COVID grew, that through science-based measures, particularly well-considered testing, the importation of COVID could have been managed without completely shutting down the entire system. And it would have been effective in our views. We have to make sure that any measures and restrictions reflect the fact that we do need to live with COVID and find ways to mitigate risk, with vaccination and or testing, and without shutting down key elements of the economy. On the financial front, where other countries stepped up and gave $123 billion in support to their industries by May of 2020, with more to follow, our government did not provide sector-specific support until April of 2021. Eventually, as you know, the government agreed to a $6 billion loan package for us, which we're grateful for. However, apart from the $1.2 billion set aside for customer refunds, we have not drawn on any of this money, although it remains available, and we do regard it basically as insurance. We expect to continue to access the public markets to finance our future requirements. Now, the focus is on what comes next, emerging from the pandemic. Certainly, we're well positioned on a relative basis, but we have much more debt on our balance sheet, so it will make it more challenging for us to do all the things we want to do.
Mike, let me just pick up on a point you just made, which was a surprise even to me, and the $6 billion fund that was set aside by government to assist. You have drawn on that to reimburse passengers, but you're saying the rest of that you have not drawn upon, and you've used your own resources.
That's correct, Karen. We wanted to put it in place as another layer of insurance, and we preferred not to draw upon it, other than the money we needed to pay non-refundable refunds.
I think that's an important message, because there was so much coverage at the time about the amount of money involved, and the impression was being given that this was a massive bailout of the sector. And what you're saying is in fact, you're keeping this in reserve as opposed to necessarily using this in the short term, and you're determined to the greatest extent possible to use your own resources to be able to build back and to be able to come back to ordinary activities.
Right. Now, I think everyone knows that the government, as part of the overall package, bought roughly 6% of our shares for $500 million. And, I certainly believe that's going to be a very attractive investment for the government of Canada as well.
You also, in your answer a few minutes ago, were talking about the employee base. You mentioned the pain that there was in having to lay off some 20,000 employees, and the fact that you're bringing people back, which is very positive news. Now, pre-COVID, attracting talent was a major challenge for airlines around the world, and particularly in finding experienced pilots and aircraft engineers. How is that situation today? And over the longer term, what sorts of things can business and government and educational institutions do to entice more people to consider these careers and to live and work in Canada?
No, it's an excellent point, and something we spend a lot of time on. Unlike many carriers in Canada and around the world, we continue to operate through the pandemic. And we flew a limited commercial schedule, but we flew over 10,000 cargo-only flights as well. This allowed us to maintain our pilot workforce and keep our pilots flying and current as well from a training perspective. Otherwise, this would have been a massive restart challenge for us, and a cost as well. And it also allowed us to keep a sizable portion of the rest of our workforce. Like you were mentioning in your opening remarks, the airline industry and Air Canada was down almost 90%, some parts over the last 18 months. But we kept roughly half our employees on payroll because they were critical to the entire operation. And this gave us a very solid base to work from, and which we're now doing. And I would add, unlike a lot of companies, we're able to get our people back. We are a destination of choice for people looking for aviation sector jobs, and as evidenced by the fact that we received a lot of best employer awards. And that's why it was very difficult for us to lay people off, given the culture we've developed here over the last 10 years. That being said, though, there is significant competition for talent, and getting good people takes a lot of effort. And even before the pandemic, we have a number of programs, and we're deeply involved in encouraging young people, particularly young women, to consider aviation careers. We also support skilled work in Canada through our aircraft acquisition and maintenance programs, which is, again, a very vibrant sector of the economy, especially here in Quebec. We've always supported the Canadian aerospace industry, and we will continue to do so. Many aircraft in our fleet were built here in Canada, Dash 300s, the regional jets, Q400s, and the newest aircraft, the Airbus 220, formerly the C Series. Again, the maintenance of these aircraft will be performed in Quebec by a qualified supplier for a minimum of 20 years. And as I said earlier, all the other narrow bodies we have, Boeing 737, Airbus 320, et cetera, more than 100 aircraft will be maintained here in Canada as well. We have always made a strong commitment to the Canadian aerospace industry for training and other reasons. And again, let me assure you that we'll continue to do so for the reasons we just spoke about. We have many suppliers from the aerospace industry across Canada, large companies, but also many SMEs for our flight simulators, aircraft components, pieces, engine maintenance, etc. Skills training is incredibly important for modern economics and is a means to provide people rewarding careers and fulfilling lives. So definitely, it's a time, as I said earlier, it's something we spend a lot of time about and something we continue to talk to the government of Canada about supporting as well.
Mike, we're getting some questions in from the audience. I want to remind people again, if you have a question for Mike, please submit it through the Slido app, and we'll be pleased to enter it into the discussion. Just before I turn to the audience questions, can we touch briefly on the issue of the environment? The challenge that many of the businesses are facing today in Canada relates to the environmental impact that they have. Now, aviation and aerospace are certainly no exception to that. And can you just take a minute to talk through the work that Air Canada is doing to operate sustainably?
You know, I believe that climate change is one of our most urgent challenges. And we have no choice to face up to it, accept our responsibilities, and do our part to manage it. Certainly, as I said, it's a personal objective of mine. And Air Canada has been a leader in this area. You know, if there's one virtue of the pandemic, and again, there's not many, but if there's one, there's no doubt it heightened our awareness of sustainability and the connection with the environment. You know, we, again, there's risk and consequences associated with climate change, but we should all remember that sustainability is also good business, both from an economic and a brand perspective. Customers want us to behave responsibly, and they will use their wallets to show disapproval if they believe the airline is acting irresponsibly. And another significant stakeholder, our employees, are demanding we take a leadership role in climate change and overall ESG efforts. And again, we've all felt it. There are tremendous outside pressures, including from environmental advocates, ESG investors, and governments. And those demands will only grow. And it's important that we're ahead of them. So that's why we always take our environmental obligations very seriously. Since 1990, Air Canada has improved its fuel efficiency by 43%. Since 2016, we've have over 115 fuel efficiency projects have been undertaken, and we reduced more than 145,000 tons of GHG from air operations. You know, these projects have covered every part of our business, from the way we fly our planes, reducing weight on aircraft. We've experimented with and continue to support development of alternative fuels, including SAF, which is going to be a key initiative going forward. On the ground, we're using alternative fuels for vehicles, reducing office waste, retrofitting buildings, and the list goes on and on and on. Yet the pandemic affected us severely and devastated our industry. We still focused on the acceleration of several innovation and sustainability initiatives. For example, one of the key reasons to ground the 79 older aircraft, less efficient aircraft, was it advanced our sustainability efforts. And I'm proud that we have not relented on sustainability throughout the pandemic. And in March of this year, we made a major new commitment to the environment. We set a goal of net zero emissions by 2050 with fairly aggressive interim targets so people can see our progress. In defining that pathway, Air Canada set 2030 absolute midterm GHG net reduction targets, a 20% GHG reduction from our air operations by 2030 compared to our 2019 baseline, and a 30% GHG reduction from our ground operations by 2030, again, compared to the 2019 baseline. We've also committed to an initial investment of $50 million for sustainable aviation fuels, or SAF, as well as carbon reductions and removals. And again, this is another area where we believe governments have a role to play. Another key area is partnerships. And one example, and I know Tom Ruth is probably in the audience, is we announced in May with the Edmonton Airport a partnership focusing on a number of different sustainability initiatives: electrification of aviation equipment, hydrogen fuel cell technologies, green power generation using the Airport City Solar, the world's largest airport-based solar farm, development and usage of sustainable aviation fuel, biofuels, and hydrogen, replacement of single-use plastics with plant fiber materials, drones for e-commerce and cargo delivery, and other initiatives in industries such as agriculture and forestry to offset carbon emissions. Again, I think from this brief review, Perrin, that you can see that we're deeply committed to doing our part for the environment.
Thank you. So we have questions from the audience that have been submitted through Slido. First one is, how much does new technology, some of it even developed in Canada, like the C-Series A220, play into Air Canada's future economic and sustainability contributions? Does tech being Canadian made make it more attractive to Air Canada?
The short answer is absolutely. The 220, we think, it's an incredible plane. It was an incredible plane on paper. It's from many different perspectives, certainly from a customer perspective. But to the point about sustainability, it does have a much lower fuel burn, and that is a key decision point in our analysis. When we, just not for the economic benefit of burning less fuel, but for the fact that we've made these commitments, and we need to continue to reduce our carbon footprint on a go-forward basis. And I can also say, the 737 MAX, another very efficient narrow body, is, many of those parts are made in Canada as well. So they've got a fairly high degree of Canadian content as well. On top of that, we continue to look, and we try to continue to support future innovation in Canada for new technologies that may be 20 years from now. And there are parts around the world that are exploring with battery power, with hydrogen power. Still early days yet, and we certainly would love to partner with companies in Canada to develop a Canadian-grown solution to some of those issues.
Thank you. Next question. What are some of the lessons you've learned during COVID that you may continue to build on in better times? For example, will your increased focus on cargo be permanent?
Absolutely. So there's a number of lessons learned. We do want to expand our cargo business. It was like I said in my comments, it was always a good business for us. It's going to become a much better business for us. And we're going to be adding on top of that an e-commerce business. And we're not going to compete against Amazon to a large degree, but we're going to take a piece of a very large pie, in the fact that we'll be adding partners on the first mile and the last mile, so we can go door to door, because we, for the most part, ship it from the first mile to the last mile. And so cargo will be certainly a key focus point going forward. The cleanliness of the planes will continue to be a very strong part of our culture, and what we can do to ensure that the environment remains safe for all passengers. We're going to take another look at the whole customer journey within the airport, from the time they go on screen and book a flight to the time they get home, and we think we can make that a much more pleasant experience for all travelers. And so we're working on a number of digital type solutions through our technology and e-commerce group to make that a much more pleasurable experience for the customer from an entire journey. For example, we just launched an incredible program called Travel Ready. We are keeping track of what every country now requires in terms of paperwork testing And so any customer from Air Canada, or any customer period, can go on aircanada.com and research what they need to do to go to Greece, or go to Japan, or go anywhere in the world, basically. And we will continue to build upon that to deliver a much stronger customer experience.
One of the things I've been trying to get my head around is what are the permanent changes that have been made as a result of the pandemic, whether in how we work or how commerce is done and so on. And you had mentioned earlier in your remarks the strain that supply chains were under, that in some cases they were broken. And you're saying now that you will be continuing a focus on cargo. Do you see permanent changes to the nature of supply chains? And if so, what would those be?
It's going to be interesting to see how the normal, historical supply chain does in fact recover over the next couple of years. And I think it's going to take some time for it. And air cargo has always played a big part in the overall supply chain. I think as we get recovery, there'll be more passenger planes in the air, and I do believe that hopefully suppliers will see air cargo as a very viable means to move more cargo in a faster pace than the alternatives. So I do see us coming back to where we were, but it's going to take some time. And what Air Canada is trying to do is leverage its brand, leverage its network, leverage its contacts around the world to take a smaller piece of or a bigger piece of the overall cargo business that we expect to grow.
Very interesting question here from Anthony. What are some thoughts on newer technologies in electric aircraft, such as eVTOL?
Yeah, it's a very interesting area, and we could spend a fair amount of time on it. We are continuing to explore these technologies. They're not commercially viable at this point in time, and they're not expected to be commercially viable for some period of time. I mean, right now, the latest I heard is that maybe later this decade we might have an electric plane that might fly 300-400 kilometers with about 19 people on it, and so that's a fairly small market to operate in. But the fact that we're continuing to look at these new technologies means that will improve as time goes on. So Air Canada, like I said earlier, wants to be a leader in this area. We are speaking to many companies around the world, ensuring that we understand where the new technology is going, just not from an electric perspective, but also from a hydrogen perspective. And you will see Air Canada more and more in the market, partnering hopefully with government, partnering certainly with leading innovators and other companies in Canada to help develop just not the technology from a airframe perspective or an engine perspective, but also from an SAF perspective. And as I said earlier, I think SAF is going to be the key driver of reducing carbon footprint for the foreseeable future. But a lot of work has to be done across industries to make that happen.
I think we have time for one last question here. Dan Bachner, kudos on the way the company has navigated the pandemic. As mentioned, developing SAF. Now, I'm hoping you know what SAF is.
Yep.
Is key to reducing emissions. Would Air Canada consider taking a leading role in pushing government to develop homegrown refining capacity in a public way?
Absolutely, and that was just the end of my last comment, is that we believe SAF is the best near-term solution to reducing the carbon footprint for the industry. The U.S. is a little bit ahead of us right now, but there's no reason why Canada can't catch up. But it's going to take a collective effort of pulling together the entire supply chain for SAF, of which we're part of. And we have no issue leading.
SAF is sustainable aviation fuel.
Right. From stock feed, and again, we've been putting SAF blended in some of our planes on an ongoing basis. It's much more expensive right now because there's no critical mass. But we're going to have to collectively, government, the entire supply chain for SAF needs to come together and develop the capabilities to produce SAF in Canada. And we're happy to commit to purchase that SAF at reasonable prices, so that we can support the investment. And we are working on those type of issues right now.
Mike, it's been fascinating. What an incredible time for you to be taking over responsibility for this Canadian flag carrier. It's a critical part of our infrastructure in Canada. It's something that is a source of pride for Canadians. And it's a sector which has been under enormous pressure over the course of the last year and a half. You're a brave man who likes challenges in taking this on. But what you've demonstrated today is the vision that you have for the industry, the confidence you have in the sector and in the company coming back. And we're most grateful to you for taking the time, for being with us today and offering your take on both the challenges and the opportunities facing Air Canada and air travel globally. We're most grateful for that.
Well, thank you, Perry. It's been absolutely my pleasure to talk, and I love talking about it. It's an honor to be CEO and be part of this team that will make a big difference as time goes on.
Well, and thank you for your leadership in helping us all navigate COVID. And I can say on behalf of everyone that we are all just can't wait till we can get back to traveling again.